Hello and welcome, or welcome back, to the Sales Enablement Festival. I hope you're enjoying the event so far. Today is all about our bonus content, as we are sharing some of the very best presentations from the previous Future of Sales Festival. Speakers will not be joining for live Q&A, however, you can connect with them in the SEC Slack group. Thanks again to all of our sponsors and to you, our attendees, for bringing this event to life. Enjoy the festival.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, good evening if you're outside of North America. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you and interact with you afterwards. This is my third non-IBM virtual conference, but it's the first one as a speaker, and so I'm looking forward to all the presentations and looking forward to the interactions. The hosts have done a great job of pivoting from a physical to a virtual event, and having gone through some of these same pains as I'll talk in my presentation, I appreciate and feel the pain. I think we were supposed to be in New York City originally, if I'm not mistaken, Jordan. But here we are, long overdue for our haircuts. And speaking of lockdowns, with flying not being the most palatable mode of travel these days, I found myself driving to Austin from Dallas recently, and it's about a 3 or 4 hour drive. And when you go on a drive like this, sometimes you get that FOMO feeling, the fear of missing out, like you're falling behind on your email or your Slack or who knows what else that you use to communicate, with your colleagues. So I had the urge to start calling people, as that's probably the only thing you can do relatively safely while you're driving. But then I realized that it was 6 in the morning, so I wasn't going to call anyone, colleagues or friends or otherwise. But it did get me thinking, and think about this, if you don't mind. Who was the last person you called just to chat? Hopefully that's changed since the COVID situation, but think about before that. Maybe that was your mother or some old friend. But in reality, most people spend less time talking on the phone, and most conversations really are reserved for the most important people in our lives. And surveys reflect this. They show that people would rather text you than talk to you, and phone calls are really the least used form of communication when compared to social media or texting or emailing. And kind of the main exception for me personally is when I get a call with a New York area code, and that's because IBM is headquartered there. But otherwise, I usually let it go to voicemail if I don't recognize it. And so these trends are clear in business-to-business sales. Also, callback rates, they hover around 1%. And even emails are only at about 24% opened. So 24% of the time are even opened. You already know things like, the fact that you need a good social media selling program, or rather social selling program. But really that's just the beginning. And also you don't need me to remind you that digital engagement is table stakes now with COVID. So according to Gartner, buyers spend 17% of their buying process with potential suppliers. You probably heard this, it's not a new statistic, and it's still true. And if 80% of life is showing up, that means we have to meet our buyers where they are. And what you see on the screen are just a few of the vendor independent sources out there. In reality, we often don't even get on the short list with our clients because we're not a part of the conversation on Quora or Reddit or Stack Overflow. And these conversations often decide the fate of our deals. And the people that are on these forums, the people that post and reply, are not necessarily our sellers. They're not necessarily even employees of us or our competitors, but rather they're our fans. They're fans of our product. They're not promoters. But it could also be net detractors. And so how do we get ahead of this? How do we embrace this evangelist sort of mindset? How do we create fans and net promoters out there that will defend our company and our products against the competition? So we'll come back to that. I came to sales enablement, just a little bit about me. I came to sales enablement from the field. I was a sales leader. And this is not too long ago. It's back in 2018, late 2018. I was brought in by my manager, Mary Tafuri, to help her rebuild our sales enablement strategy for a business that's double-digit billions in size. And these are the data tenets, or some of the data tenets that we used to build this strategy. And the first one is really striking. 74% of buyers choose the rep that was the first to add value and insight. So you look at that and you go, wow. But then instinctively, as a good seller, you know this. We know this because we practice it as sellers. And the other ones are really not a surprise. Social selling is a great prospecting tool, and prospecting really is indeed the hardest part of the job. And also, we instinctively know that buyers are far likely to engage us when we have new insights, where we can provoke their thinking and challenge them. And in fact, turns out 5 times as likely, as surveys show. And I believe that in a post-COVID world, this resonates even further, even more than ever. But this ability to be provocative, thought-provocative, disruptive in a client's business, it requires confidence. It requires knowledge. Confidence requires knowledge. And so we have to rethink our approach, which was fine with me because I was new to sales enablement. So we agreed on the traits that we wanted in our sellers, that we wanted to nurture. And we call them the 5 traits of a modern seller. And you can see them here on the screen: emphatic listener, storytelling mastery, disruptive tech enthusiast, trust and advocacy leader, and knowledge amplifier. We know that buyers are more interested in learning than in a sales pitch. And these are the superpowers, if you will, that a seller should have to reach that buyer. And once they reach the buyer, to build credibility, understand the client situation, and then have the domain and product expertise to help that client disrupt their business and hopefully their industry. And so I found this quote. It's by our former CEO. She transitioned out on April 1st, and it's 7 years old. So it's quite old in technology terms, or in the kind of fast-paced society that we're in here. And it's not a statement for sellers necessarily, but it's for modern workers in general. And the gist of it is that your value, my value, our value is not what we know, but it's what we share. And this has impacts on how we hire, who we retain, how we rate, how we compensate. Sphere of influence years ago was a term we used to use for thought leaders, or in modern parlance, influencers. But this is not just reserved for those top tier evangelists in our company anymore. It really applies to all of us. Here's an even more wordy chart for you. And since that was from our outgoing CEO, this is from our new CEO that started on April 1st, and that's Arvind Krishna. And this is from 5 years ago. Key takeaways I highlighted in bold, and that is, you have to become an evangelist for your work. And evangelism hinges on belief. And furthermore, the best evangelists believe in their work and have a compelling desire to explain it to the world. Now, that sounds like a lot to ask of our employees. But sometimes what I found is, in leading large team, is that out of fear that we're asking too much, we're actually not asking them to do something bold enough and big enough. And so IBM is #1 in AI market share. We are a leader in data science. We're a leader in machine learning, in search, in AI search rather, in conversational computing, and even in design. How many people know that? Well, I do, and I feel a compelling reason to tell you here now and to tell the world. And this is what we want our sellers to do in their own authentic way, and for them to be proud and unabashed about their strengths and the strengths of the company that they represent. But at the same time, our sellers have to be armed with a dose of realism as well, and that is, what are the deals and competitive situations they should avoid? And so we are going big. To my previous point, we expect sellers to sell or sellers that sell technology to be technical. We want them to be able to give product demos. It's not just for sales engineers. If you're selling technology, you're expected to know how the product works. So give the demo. Know multiple whiteboards for a given use case and pick the one that's most relevant for the conversation that you're having with your client. In fact, we want everyone at IBM, from our CEO, Arvind, down to almost the secretary and janitor, to be able to demo Cloud Pak for Data. It's our data and AI platform. And so for our sales kickoffs, which I'll talk about in just a minute, we asked all sellers to learn, among other things, multiple whiteboards, multiple demos. And so this is me here. This is me teaching a whiteboard, and you can find this on my LinkedIn profile if you'd like. So if sellers internalize these messages, these multiple messages, right? They start to learn how to tell the story, and once they're able to do that, and then apply the right industry or geography filter for the client, they are now authentic. So now you have authenticity, and now you become interested or interesting. Now you become relevant, and with the right domain knowledge, you can also be thought-provoking. And so those are the key ingredients to being authentic. And without authenticity, you're just retweeting, you're just reposting, and you're a commercial. You're pushing a product. And if this is how we want our sellers to be, then we need the training, we need the inspiration and the incentive to do so. And so this cartoon, I've had it for so many years now, but it's a really cool one to show to sellers, because it points to the irony that we preach about technology and how technology transforms traditional ways of doing business, and yet we ourselves are sometimes stuck in our old ways, waiting for someone else to make us transform. And so you have sellers, and technical sellers in this case, that go the extra mile because they believe. They believe in their teams, they believe in their missions, they believe in their company. This is pre-COVID here, obviously, but you see these two working late at night. This is in Las Vegas at a conference, while they could be partying like a lot of their peers. But the next day, they get to show their wares to 20,000 people that are coming to this conference. And so that's why they're doing this. And on the right-hand side of the slide, you see examples of sellers that are writing blogs, they're making podcasts, or even better, there are others that are writing or blogging or writing newspaper articles, as you see on the screen here, about seeing our sellers and technical sellers speak or help some worthy cause. And so at IBM, we used to have, and we still have this Think 40. And this is a way for us to ensure that everybody in the company is getting at least 40 hours of learning. But is that really enough in today's economy? And you will all agree, I'm sure, that is not. And the expectation now is really more like think 300 or think 400 hours, or even more. And maybe about a third of this is required or structured learning that we provide to our sellers, that we curate, if you will. But the rest is really up to the individual seller. The rest is really up to you. You decide what you want to read. You decide what blogs to read, who to follow. and really on your own time, because you have the drive to be authentic, to be interesting, to be thought-provoking. And so, are we there yet? This is my husky puppy Nala after a 5-mile run. We're not, and we'll never really get there because it's a journey because of these challenges that we have, and everybody has their own sets of challenges. So our challenges, as you can see, we have a massive sales force. We have giant kickoff events that we do where we roll out enablement. So 7,000 sellers, as a matter of fact, for these events. And they're overwhelmed by the vastness of what they need to know and what they need to sell. Some sellers have literally dozens or even hundreds of things they have to sell and they have to understand. Also, we have to have actionable metrics, and we didn't always have them, and we can still do better. And certainly the landscape is changing in technology. So data science is a must. First, we have to understand what is our baseline. And we show, one of the things that we did early on is we showed empirically that sellers with higher skills sell more. And this really justified what we do. It justified the investment that we need to make in skills, in new tooling, new programs, et cetera. And then we also have to measure or assess the skills and do this regularly to see whether the programs we have in place are advancing the right skills. We also launched a Game On program, so a gamification program. First, this started off as a simple WordPress website, but it quickly caught on, and we built a more sophisticated website to support all of these programs. With this Game On program, which by the way is award-winning in the industry now, we can reward desired sales behavior with what we call blue points. And blue points are convert to green dollars, and you can buy pretty much anything with them. And so with targeted programs, we can support things like product launches, new sales plays, and do this while making it fun and competitive and rewarding. We may think we're doing great, right? We have lots of sellers that we support, lots of stakeholders, a huge organization. How do we get validation from them? How do we make sure that we're doing the right things? In fact, most of our content is created by these stakeholders that I mentioned. They determine the go-to-market strategy in the first place. So we have to be super aligned with them. And for larger initiatives like the kickoff events that I mentioned, we start by holding a design thinking session. So even though our events don't begin until early the following year, mid-January and later, we start our design thinking and we align on kickoff starting in August. So that far away from the event. And really the point is to bring everyone that's a stakeholder from product management, from the worldwide sales organization, from the geographies, from technical sales, from marketing, really all of the facets of the organization that have a stake in the field. And so this way everyone is engaged from the ideation phase. And then we continue working together in cross-functional teams. In fact, we probably have around 100 squads, cross-functional squads, for this purpose, just for our kickoffs. So very agile in nature, and the squads kind of force us to stay in alignment as well because of their cross-functional nature. And so this brings us to the kickoff events that I mentioned. We usually have 3 per year. This is of course pre-COVID, right? Everything is changing now. But you can see the magnitude of these events. So almost 18,000 served earlier this year. We had the one in Vienna. We had the one in Vegas. But then late in February, we had to pivot to a virtual event for Singapore because of COVID-19. So I didn't make it to Singapore, unfortunately. It's one of my favorite destinations in the world, one of my favorite cities. And we only had 2 weeks to make this pivot, which is a story worthy of a presentation in terms of lessons learned and the proper tooling that's required to make it happen. So it's worthy of another presentation, like I said. But I believe we did a really good job with this of preserving the experience to the point where the feedback surveys and the NPS scores from the individual sessions and the events overall, and the comments, the raw comments, they were virtually indistinguishable from the physical events. And that's what kind of made it a success for me. Plus, the NPS scores were actually higher than the 2 physical events, which was surprising. Maybe people were tended to be a little bit kinder to us because they knew how hard we had to work to pivot the events. And so I mentioned gamification earlier, and we practice the same principles at our kickoff event. We gamify the experience with leaderboards to make it fun, and also to reward the right behaviors, the right activities, the right experiences. So those sellers, for example, that deliver the best whiteboard or the best client pitch, or complete a particularly challenging lab exercise, get points. We also award points for smaller set of points, granted, but for things like visiting expo booths, for sending out the most tweets, so being socially active and promoting, the technology, the conference, etc. And so, kind of drilling down into some of the activities that we have as part of our enablement events, specifically for Fast Start, which is our set of kickoff events. Sellers had to tag opportunities. So that to bring opportunities to Fast Start, and sellers were scored how they did on the various activations. And you can see an example of a scoring rubric here. This is an example of an actual session. So the theme of Fast Start, of our kickoff events, as I mentioned, is activation. So it's not university style. It's not, you don't come there to sit and learn. You come there to activate what you have been learning throughout the year, because you're expected to be learning throughout the year. And this is where you get challenged by coaches, you get challenged by your peers. And so again, this is an example of one of the activities. Here, a seller describes a competitive situation that they found themselves in, and they explain how the client challenged them. And then the seller here asks, what would you have done? The teams then have 7 minutes to respond to the challenge. And each activity is gamified with points and the leaderboards that I mentioned. Not everybody that comes to the event is at the same level, even though we have pre-work to ensure that everybody has the same baseline at least coming in. So we're not teaching to the lowest common denominator. But some sellers that come in are much more experienced. They're much better at what they do. And I mentioned that sellers have to tag opportunities and apply whiteboards and demos and activities as they apply to their opportunities. And so for our more experienced sellers, we didn't want them to be bored or doing all the work if they're sitting at a table where they know the subject matter best. So we had special tables for them. We had diamond level tables where they had to stand and deliver among peers that are similarly skilled, and also get special coaching. And in other activities, diamond level sellers were coaches themselves. So we had that sort of a peer-to-peer mentoring and coaching, if you will. And finally, we're all physical beings. It's kind of strange to say that virtually to all of you, but we're so used to having everything delivered digitally. And we've accepted that. But for Fast Start this year, we actually decided to print a book and hand it out to every seller. And it wasn't that expensive. It was, a few $1,000s for hundreds of copies of this, thousands actually. And so with this book, we put everything together, the offerings as well as how to sell them. So what we sell, how to sell, put it in one book. Now this book couldn't be very thick, so it's only 50 pages, but it's littered with QR codes. You see the QR codes here. So you point to that and it takes you to more detail behind that. So there's a page or two or a few behind each one of these sections, but then they point you to the latest and greatest material. So that way, this book never, or is designed to not go stale, at least for this year. And I'll close with these two dueling quotes. But as you read them, I'll also summarize the 4 key takeaways that I'd like you all to leave or to take with you from this presentation. And then number 1 is that your value is not what you know, but what you share. That's number 1. Number 2 is without authenticity, you will be labeled as a commercial pushing a product. Number 3, 80% of life is showing up, as the saying goes. And so we have to meet our buyers where they are, including places like Reddit or Quora. And finally, and I think this is the most important for me, is sellers will go the extra mile because they believe. They believe in their products, they believe in their teams, they believe in their mission, and they believe in their company.